The fluorescent lights burned white above Robert Mitchell's head. He couldn't move. Tubes snaked from his arms, chest, throat. The mechanical wheeze of a ventilator matched his shallow breaths. Everything hurt a deep, tearing pain that radiated from somewhere in his back he couldn't reach. Where was he? A face materialized through the fog. Sarah. Her eyes were red-rimmed, hollow. She looked 10 years older than when yesterday, last week. She gripped his hand, her fingers trembling against his palm. "You're awake," she whispered, voice cracking. "Oh, God, you're awake!" He tried to speak. Nothing came out but a strangled rasp around the breathing tube. Behind her, a doctor stood in the doorway, young, exhausted. The man's jaw was tight, his white coat creased and stained. The doctor's eyes met his, and Bob saw something there that made his blood run cold. Relief. And something else. Anger. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. 4 months earlier, Robert Mitchell stood in his workshop behind the house on Elm Street in Winchester, Massachusetts, running his calloused palm across a piece of white oak. The grain was perfect. No knots, no splits. It would make a beautiful cabinet door for the Hendersons down the street. At 58, Bob's hands told the story of 35 years in carpentry, thick fingers permanently stained with wood dust and varnish, a scar across his right thumb from a table saw incident in his 20s. These hands had built decks, framed additions, restored antique furniture. They'd built half the porches in this neighborhood. He was a quiet man, broad-shouldered, but starting to stoop from decades of bending over workbenches. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and deep lines creased his forehead. People said Bob Mitchell was reliable, steady, the kind of man who showed up when he said he would and did the job right. The workshop smelled like pine and sawdust. Tools hung in perfect order on pegboards. Bob believed in organization. Measure twice, cut once. He'd tell anyone who'd listen. It was more than a carpentry rule. It was how he lived. Through the workshop window, he could see into the kitchen. Sarah was making breakfast, moving between the stove and the counter with the easy rhythm of 30 years of marriage. She was 55. A retired elementary school teacher with kind eyes and graying brown hair she wore in a practical ponytail. Every morning, she made coffee and toast. The toast was always slightly burned. Bob never complained. Their son Tommy was visiting this weekend, 35 years old, a resident physician at Massachusetts General Hospital. Bob felt a surge of pride thinking about it. His son, a doctor. Tommy had worked so hard, spent so many years in school. Bob had helped pay for some of it, taking out a second mortgage they'd only just finished paying off. Then there was Lisa. Their daughter, 32, recently divorced, staying with them temporarily with her 2 kids. Bob's workshop had become a refuge for his granddaughter, Emily, who was 5 and curious about everything. She loved watching him work, asking a million questions about wood and the tools and how things fit together. Bob heard the back door open. Emily came running out in her pajamas, blonde hair, tangled from sleep. "Grandpa!" She launched herself at his legs. He scooped her up, grunting slightly. "Good morning, Princess." "Will you make me a dollhouse?" Please, please, please." Bob smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Anything for you, sweetheart?" Sarah called from the kitchen window. "Breakfast in 5 minutes. You too." Bob set Emily down and watched her run back inside. He turned to his workbench, reaching for his measuring tape. Then he felt it. A twinge in his lower back, sharp, then dull. He pressed his hand against the spot just above his right hip. Nothing to worry about. Probably pulled something lifting lumber yesterday. He'd be fine. 3 weeks later, Bob stood in the bathroom with his shirt off, twisting to see his lower back in the mirror. There it was, a raised bump about the size of a marble just above his belt line on the right side. He pressed it gently. It was firm, slightly tender, nothing too painful. Probably just a cyst. His father had gotten those sometimes. Harmless little things that eventually went away on their own. Bob pulled his shirt back on and opened his laptop at the kitchen table. Sarah had gone to the grocery store. The house was quiet. He typed into the search bar, "lump on lower back." The results flooded in. Lipoma, sebaceous cyst, boil, all benign, according to most sites. Some recommended seeing a doctor if concerned, but nothing suggested urgency. Bob clicked through a few more pages. Home remedies, warm compresses, keep it clean. He could handle this himself. Bob closed the laptop and opened his email instead. His inbox contained the monthly reminder from his insurance company. Cobra continuation coverage after early retirement, $1,247 per month. He'd already paid this month's premium, draining a chunk from their savings account. He navigated to their bank account. Checking balance $3,200. Savings $127,000. That savings represented 30 years of careful planning. Every overtime shift, every side job, every birthday check they hadn't spent. It was supposed to carry them through retirement, help with emergencies, maybe leave something for Tommy and Lisa. Bob pulled up the insurance company's website and looked at his coverage details. Doctor visit copay $80. But if they ordered imaging ultrasound, CT scan, that could be $500 to $1,000 before insurance kicked in. His deductible was $8,000. $8,000 they'd have to pay out of pocket before insurance covered anything substantial. For a cyst? For something that would probably go away on its own. He thought about Lisa, upstairs, barely making ends meet after her divorce. She'd asked to borrow money for first and last month's rent once she found an apartment. Bob had already mentally set aside $5,000 for her. He thought about Tommy's student loans, $280,000 in debt from medical school. Tommy never asked for help. Too proud. But Bob knew his son was struggling. $8,000 for a doctor to tell him what he already knew. It was just a cyst. It would heal. Bob closed his laptop. That night, Sarah noticed him wincing as he climbed into bed. "Your back still bothering you?" she asked. "Just a little stiff," Bob said. "Nothing serious." Sarah studied his face in the dim light from the hallway. She'd been married to this man for 3 decades. She knew when he was hiding something. "Bob, I'm fine. Sarah, really, just need to stretch more." She wanted to push, wanted to demand to see a doctor. But Bob was stubborn, had always been stubborn about these things. He'd once walked around on a fractured ankle for a week before she'd forced him to the emergency room. "Promise me if it gets worse, you'll get it checked. I promise." Bob turned off the bedside lamp. In the darkness, he pressed his hand against the lump It felt slightly bigger than it had that morning. Probably just his imagination. He'd keep an eye on it. Everything would be fine. 6 weeks after finding the lump, Bob woke at 3 in the morning drenched in sweat. The pain in his back had shifted from a dull ache to something sharper, meaner. It radiated down his right leg now, making it hard to find a comfortable position. He slipped out of bed carefully, trying not to wake Sarah. In the bathroom, he stripped off his soaked t-shirt and looked in the mirror. The lump had grown. It was no longer marble-sized. Now it looked like a golf ball pushing up under his skin, angry and red around the edges. Bob ran cold water in the sink and splashed his face. His hands were shaking. This wasn't normal. He knew it wasn't normal. But what choice did he have? They couldn't afford thousands in medical bills right now. Lisa needed help. Tommy was drowning in debt. Their savings had to last him another decade at least. He filled the bathtub with cold water and eased himself in, biting down on a washcloth to keep from making noise. The cold helped a little. He sat there for 20 minutes, breathing through the pain, telling himself it would pass. When he finally climbed out, he saw Sarah standing in the doorway. She didn't say anything, just stood there in her nightgown, tears streaming silently down her face. "Sarah, don't." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Don't tell me you're fine." They stared at each other across the small bathroom. Bob wanted to tell her everything, wanted to admit he was scared, that something was very wrong, that he needed help. Instead, he said, "It's just a bad night. I'll be better in the morning." Sarah turned and walked back to bed without another word. Bob didn't follow immediately. He stood at the sink, gripping the porcelain edge, and examined the lump again. It seemed to have shifted slightly. The redness extended farther down his back now, toward his hip. When he pressed on it, the pain made his vision blur. He took 4 ibuprofen and went back to bed. The next morning, Tommy came by for breakfast. He'd been working 30-hour shifts at the hospital and looked exhausted, but he always made time to visit on his days off. Bob moved stiffly to the table, trying to hide his limp. Tommy noticed immediately. "You okay?" "Dad, fine. Just slept wrong. You're walking like someone who threw out their back. Let me take a look. I don't need my son poking around at me like I'm one of your patients." The words came out harsher than Bob intended. Tommy's face hardened. "I'm trying to help." "I don't need help. I'm 58, not 88. I can handle a little back pain." Sarah set down plates with more force than necessary. The sound made everyone jump. Tommy stood up. "You know what, Dad? Fine. When you finally collapse from whatever stubborn nonsense you're dealing with, don't call me." He grabbed his jacket and left. Sarah followed him to the door. Bob heard their low voices in the hallway. Tommy's rising in frustration. "He's being an idiot, Mom. I know. Make him see a doctor. You think I haven't tried?" The door closed. Sarah came back to the kitchen and sat down across from Bob. She didn't touch her food. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly. Bob looked at his wife. 30 years of marriage. She deserved the truth. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we can't afford to find out right now." Sarah closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were filled with something Bob had rarely seen: anger. "Can we afford to bury you?" The question hung in the air between them. Bob had no answer. That afternoon, while Sarah was out with Lisa and the kids, Bob went into his workshop and closed the door. He sat at his workbench, pulled out a notebook, and began writing. He wrote about the insurance, about the money they'd saved, about Lisa needing help and Tommy drowning in loans, about how much a funeral cost versus how much medical treatment cost. He wrote about his life insurance policy. $500,000 if he died accidentally. 0 if he took his own life. He wrote 3 letters, one to Sarah, one to Tommy, one to Lisa. Then he hid them in a drawer beneath his sandpaper collection, where no one would find them unless they were looking. Bob stared at the letters for a long time. Then he locked the drawer and went back inside for dinner, pretending everything was normal. 3 months after discovering the lump, Bob was cutting oak boards in his workshop when the world tilted sideways. One moment he was guiding wood through the table saw, the next his knees buckled. The board slipped from his hands. He grabbed for the workbench, but his fingers found only air. The concrete floor rushed up to meet him. Jack Harrison, who'd stopped by to borrow a drill, heard the crash from the driveway. He ran into the workshop and found Bob crumpled on the floor, a thin line of blood trickling from where his temple had struck the edge of the workbench. "Bob, Jesus! Bob!" Jack dropped to his knees, checking for a pulse. It was there, rapid and weak. Bob's eyes fluttered open. "Don't," he mumbled. "Don't call anyone." "The hell I won't." Jack pulled out his phone. "Too expensive. I'll be fine. Just help me up." "You're burning up, man. And there's blood." "Jack, please." Bob tried to sit up and immediately collapsed back down. "Can't afford the ambulance?" Jack stared at his friend. They'd worked together for 15 years. Bob had helped him build his deck, fix his roof after the storm, taught his son woodworking. Bob was the most stubborn and prideful man Jack had ever known. "I'm calling. If you're mad at me later, so be it." He dialed 911. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later. By then, Sarah had come running from the house, her face white with terror. Bob was semi-conscious, mumbling incoherently about insurance and bills and not being a burden. At Massachusetts General Hospital's emergency room, Bob was wheeled into a trauma bay. Bright lights, voices calling out numbers, someone cutting off his shirt. BP is 90/60, heart rate 130, temperature 102.8. A young resident appeared at his bedside, dark circles under his eyes from another endless shift. He pulled on gloves and began examining Bob's back. The resident froze. "Page, surgery, now!" Bob's vision swam in and out of focus. He saw the resident's face hover above him, saw the name badge. His brain struggled to process the letters. Thomas Mitchell, Tommy, his son. "Dad," Tommy's voice cracked. "Dad, why didn't you—" He stopped, hands trembling as he palpated the massive swelling on his father's back. "How long has this been here?" Bob tried to answer but couldn't form words. Tommy ripped off his gloves and grabbed a tablet, pulling up test orders with shaking hands. "I need CBC, SIMP, blood cultures, lactic acid, CRP. Get me a CT of the abdomen and pelvis with contrast now. And somebody page infectious disease." A nurse touched his arm. "Dr. Mitchell, maybe you shouldn't—" "He's my father." Tommy's voice was steel. "I'm not leaving him." The tests came back within the hour. Tommy stood in the radiology reading room, staring at the CT scan on the screen. The attending physician stood beside him, pointing at the images. Large psoas abscess, approximately 15 centimeters, tracking along the lumbar spine. There's significant inflammatory change. His white count is 18,000. CRP is 180. He's in early sepsis. Tommy couldn't breathe. 15 centimeters. His father had been walking around with a massive infection close to his spine, close to major blood vessels, for weeks, maybe months. If we don't operate tonight, he could die, even if we do operate. The attending didn't finish the sentence. Tommy walked back to the emergency bay where his father lay. Sarah had arrived, her hand clutched in Bob's. Lisa stood in the corner, crying quietly. Bob's eyes were clearer now, the IV fluids helping. When he saw Tommy in his white coat, stethoscope around his neck, something broke in his expression. "I'm sorry," Bob whispered. "Tommy, I'm so sorry." Tommy pulled up a stool and sat beside the bed. He took his father's other hand. "Dad, you have a massive infection in your back. It's called a psoas abscess. It's tracking along your spine. We need to take you to surgery immediately. How much will it cost?" Tommy's jaw clenched. "Dad, how much? I don't know. Tens of thousands, maybe more. But if we don't operate, we can't afford it. We can't afford to bury you." The words exploded out of Tommy. Other staff members in the emergency room turned to look. Tommy lowered his voice, but it shook with emotion. "You have hours, Dad. Not days, hours. This infection is in your bloodstream. It's next to your spine. If it ruptures—" His voice broke. "Please, please let me help you." Sarah squeezed Bob's hand. "He's right. Money doesn't matter. Nothing matters except you." Bob looked at his wife, then his son, then his daughter, sobbing in the corner. He thought about the letters hidden in his workshop, about the insurance policy, about all his calculations and plans. He'd been so stupid. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." Tommy stood immediately. "I'll prep the OR." Within 30 minutes, Bob was being wheeled toward surgery. The hallway lights passed overhead in a blur. Sarah walked beside the gurney, holding his hand until they reached the red line where family couldn't cross. "I'll be right here when you wake up," she said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. Bob wanted to tell her he loved her, that he was sorry for being proud and stupid and stubborn, that she deserved better than a husband who'd rather die than ask for help. But the words wouldn't come. The doors swung closed between them. In the pre-operative area, a surgeon Bob had never met appeared at his bedside. She was in her mid-40s, with tired eyes and steady hands. Her name badge read Rebecca Stone, M.D., Mayor Mitchell. "I'm going to be performing your surgery today. We're going to drain this abscess and clean out the infection. It should be straightforward. We'll make an incision, remove the infected tissue, place drainage tubes, and close you up. 30 minutes, maybe 45 at most." Bob nodded weakly. The consent form sat on his lap, listing all the risks in small print: death, paralysis, permanent disability. He signed it with a trembling hand. Sarah stood beside him, her face drawn. Tommy hovered near the door in his scrubs. Having convinced the surgical team to let him assist, Lisa had taken the kids home but promised to come back. "I love you," Sarah whispered, gripping Bob's hand. "Love you too," Bob managed. Then to Tommy, "I'm proud of you, son." Tommy's eyes were red. "Save it for after, Dad. You're going to be fine." The anesthesiologist placed a mask over Bob's face. Count backward from 10. 10, 9, 8. The world went black in the surgical waiting room. Sarah sat clutching a paper coffee cup she hadn't touched. The surgeon had said 30 minutes. That had been 45 minutes ago. An hour passed. No one came out. 90 minutes. Still nothing. At the 2-hour mark, Lisa arrived with Emily. Any news? Sarah shook her head, unable to speak. 2.5 hours. Sarah stood and paced. The receptionist avoided her eyes. 3 hours. Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. She tried calling Tommy. No answer. 3.5 hours. Lisa was crying quietly. Emily had fallen asleep in a chair, oblivious. 4 hours. Sarah walked to the reception desk. Something's wrong. It was supposed to be 30 minutes. Why won't anyone tell me what's happening? I'm sorry, ma'am. The surgical team is still working. That's all I know. 4.5 hours. Sarah knelt in the corner of the waiting room and prayed for the first time in 20 years. Please, God, please, I'll do anything. Just don't take him from me. Inside operating room 3, Rebecca Stone was soaked in sweat beneath her surgical gown. What was supposed to be a simple drainage procedure had turned into a nightmare. When she'd made the initial incision, dark, foul-smelling pus had poured out. But instead of a contained pocket of infection, she'd found something far worse. The abscess had tunneled deep along the psoas muscle, tracking 15 centimeters along the spine. It had created multiple pockets, each one a ticking bomb of bacteria. Suction, she called out. More suction. The infection had eroded dangerously close to major blood vessels. One wrong move, and Bob Mitchell would bleed out on the table. Dr. Stone, BP is dropping, 80/50. Hang another liter of saline, miss. Push pressors if we need to. She worked methodically, carefully debriding infected tissue. But every time she thought she'd found all of it, she discovered another pocket deeper in the muscle. Page Orthopedics. I need a spine consult. This is too close to the vertebrae. Within minutes, Michael O'Brien, an orthopedic surgeon, scrubbed in. He examined the surgical field, and his face went pale. Jesus! How long has he had this? Months? Probably. He didn't seek treatment. O'Brien shook his head. If this ruptures into the spinal canal, he's paralyzed. If it hits the aorta, he's dead. Tommy stood at the edge of the operating table, handing instruments, watching his father's life hang in the balance. He'd seen countless surgeries during his residency, but none had felt like this. None had made his hands shake and his vision blur. This was his father, the man who'd taught him to ride a bike, to swing a hammer, to stand up for what was right, the stubborn fool who'd nearly killed himself out of pride. Dr. Mitchell, I need a retractor here, Stone said. Tommy moved on autopilot, holding tissue aside while Stone worked deeper into the abscess cavity. Then the monitor started screaming, VFib! He's in VFib! Bob's heart, stressed by sepsis and blood loss, had given up its normal rhythm. The line on the monitor went chaotic. Charge to 200, clear. Everyone stepped back. Stone pressed the paddles to Bob's chest. His body convulsed. The monitor showed a flat line. Nothing. Charge to 300 to clear. Another shock. Another convulsion. Still nothing. Tommy felt his world collapsing. No, 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 no. Dad, don't you dare. Dr. Mitchell. Step back, Stone ordered. He's my father. Step back or leave my OR. Tommy stumbled backward, tears streaming behind his surgical mask. Stone climbed onto a stool and began chest compressions, her hands pressing down on Bob's sternum with steady, measured force. 1, 2, 3, 4. Come on, Mr. Mitchell. You don't get to quit now, not after we've come this far. 30 compressions, another shock, nothing. 30 more compressions, another shock, a blip on the monitor, then another, then a weak, irregular rhythm that slowly steadied. We've got sinus rhythm. BP is 60/40, rising. Stone didn't pause. She went back to the abscess, working with renewed urgency. They'd lost precious minutes. Bob's body couldn't take much more. For the next hour, she meticulously cleaned out every pocket of infection, placed multiple drainage tubes, and flushed the cavity with liters of antibiotic solution. O'Brien assisted Shamat, carefully checking that the infection hadn't damaged any vertebrae or nerve roots. Finally, 5 hours and 17 minutes after the first incision, Stone placed the final suture. Close him up. Let's get him to ICU. She pulled off her mask and looked at Tommy. His face was streaked with tears. He made it, she said quietly. I won't lie to you. It was close. Closer than I'd like. He coded once, lost a lot of blood. But he's stable now. The next 48 hours are critical. If he develops sepsis, or if the infection returns, can I see him? Not yet. Let them get him settled in ICU. Then you can sit with him. Stone walked out to the waiting room where Sarah and Lisa had been sitting for over 5 hours. They stood up the moment she appeared, their faces gray with exhaustion and fear. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband is out of surgery. He's alive. Sarah's knees gave out. Lisa caught her. But, Stone continued, it was complicated. Much worse than we anticipated. He had a massive infection that had spread along his spine. We had to remove a significant amount of infected tissue. He went into cardiac arrest during the procedure, but we were able to resuscitate him. He's critical, but stable. Can I see him? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Soon. He's being moved to intensive care now. Someone will come get you when he's ready. Stone turned to leave, then paused. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband is one of the stubbornest men I've ever operated on. That stubbornness nearly killed him, but it's also what kept him alive. She walked away, leaving Sarah standing in the waiting room, finally allowing herself to collapse into her daughter's arms and sob. Bob remained in a medically induced coma for 5 days. The doctors kept him sedated while his body fought the massive infection flooding his bloodstream. Sarah never left his side except to use the bathroom. She slept in the chair beside his bed, ate whatever the nurses brought her, and held his hand through every procedure, every medication change, every crisis. Tommy checked on his father between shifts, dark circles deepening under his eyes. Lisa came with the kids during visiting hours, though she kept Emily in the hallway. The little girl didn't need to see her grandfather like this, surrounded by machines, barely human beneath all the tubes and wires. On the 5th day, a hospital administrator knocked on the ICU room door. She was young, professionally dressed, carrying a manila folder. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Jennifer Walsh from Billing. I'm so sorry to intrude during this difficult time, but we need to discuss your account. Sarah looked up from Bob's bedside, her face hollow. Not now. I understand, but hospital policy requires that we... Not now. Sarah's voice was steel. The administrator left the folder on the counter and retreated. Sarah stared at it for an hour before finally opening it. Preliminary hospital bill, 287 fours. She read the number 3 times, trying to make sense of it. $287,000. More than twice what they had in savings. Emergency surgery, 80,000, 5 surgeons, 5 hours. Emergency protocols. Intensive care, 62,000 for 5 days, 12, 4 per day for around-the-clock monitoring, specialized nursing, equipment, specialist consultations, 45,000, infectious disease, orthopedic surgery, cardiology, anesthesiology, each one billing separately. Medications, imaging, laboratory tests, 95, 430, every antibiotic dose, every x-ray, every blood draw adding up. Sarah's hands trembled. She pulled out her phone and opened their insurance company's portal. There was already a message waiting. Claim under review, pre-existing condition investigation initiated, payment suspended pending review. She clicked through to the explanation. The insurance company had found Bob's internet search history, the queries about back lumps, the dates proving he'd known about the problem for months before seeking treatment. Pre-existing condition, not disclosed on insurance application, possible fraud investigation. Sarah sat perfectly still, the phone in one hand, the bill in the other. 30 years of savings gone, and the insurance might not pay anything at all. She stood up mechanically and walked out of the IC, down the hall, through the hospital corridors. She found herself in the parking garage, sitting in their truck, screaming until her voice gave out. When she finally went back inside, she found Tommy waiting outside Bob's room. "Mom, what's wrong?" "The nurses said—" Sarah handed him the bill without a word. Tommy's face went white as he read, "This is insane. This is absolutely insane. The insurance won't pay, they're saying your father hid a pre-existing condition. He Googled back pain that doesn't—" Tommy stopped, running his hands through his hair. "I'll talk to administration. I'll figure something out. With what money? You're drowning in student loans? I don't care. I'll take out more loans. No." Sarah's voice was firm. "You've sacrificed enough for this family." She went back into Bob's room and stood at the window, looking out at the city lights. She'd married Bob Mitchell when she was 25. He'd been a carpenter's apprentice with rough hands and a shy smile. They'd had 30 years together, good years, mostly. They'd raised 2 children, built a life. And now it was all gone because Bob was too proud to ask for help. The anger hit her suddenly, sharp and hot. She turned to look at her unconscious husband, at his still face, the breathing tube down his throat, and she wanted to scream at him, to shake him, to demand why he'd done this to them, to himself, to their family. Instead, she sat back down and held his hand. That night, unable to sleep. Sarah went home for the first time in 5 days. The house felt empty and cold. She made coffee she didn't drink and wandered through the rooms. In their bedroom, she looked for Bob's insurance papers, thinking maybe she'd missed something, some clause that would help. She searched his nightstand, his dresser, his side of the closet. She found his laptop in the closet, hidden under a stack of old woodworking magazines. Why would he hide his laptop? Sarah opened it. His email was still logged in. She scrolled through, looking for insurance correspondence. Instead, she found a document in his recent files. Private Doc X. She opened it. It was a journal. Entries dated over the past 3 months. Sarah read the first entry, then the second, then all of them, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The entries documented everything: Bob's discovery of the lump, his fear, his research, his calculations about insurance and deductibles and their savings, his decision to wait. But it was the later entries that broke her. Called the life insurance company today, asked about the policy, $500,000 if I die accidentally. Nothing for suicide. So that option is off the table. Though I've thought about it, more than I should. I'm so tired. The pain is constant now. But we can't afford treatment. Lisa needs money. Tommy is drowning. If I go to the hospital, we lose everything. If I die accidentally, they get $500,000. The math is simple. Looked up ways to make it look like an accident. Workshop accident. Falls. But Sarah would know. She always knows when I'm lying. God, I'm such a coward. Tommy came by today, asked if I was okay. I snapped at him, pushed him away. It's better this way. Better if they're angry at me when I'm gone. Easier for them. Sarah smiled at me this morning, really smiled. I haven't seen that smile in weeks. How can I do this to her? But how can I not? We'll lose the house, the savings, everything. She deserves better than to spend her retirement bankrupt because of me. The final entry was dated the day before Bob collapsed. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm out of options. The pain is unbearable. The infection is spreading. I know it is. Maybe I don't have to make a choice. Maybe the choice is being made for me. If I just wait a little longer, it'll be out of my hands. That's not suicide. Is it? That's just accepting God's will. Sarah, if you ever read this, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you. I was wrong about everything. Sarah closed the laptop and sat on the bedroom floor, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Her husband had been planning to die, had been choosing death over asking for help, over trusting his family, over believing he was worth saving. She called Tommy and Lisa. Come to the house, now, both of you. When they arrived, she showed them the journal. Tommy read it and immediately started crying. He was going to, oh God, Dad was going to. Lisa couldn't finish reading. She made it halfway through before she dropped the laptop and ran to the bathroom, where they heard her being sick. The three of them sat in the living room, surrounded by photos of happier times. Bob and Sarah on their wedding day, the kids as babies, family vacations, or Christmases, birthdays. Why didn't he tell us? Lisa whispered. Because he's your father, Sarah said. Because he thought taking care of us meant suffering alone. Tommy stood up abruptly. This is America's fault, this whole broken system. People should not have to choose between medical care and bankruptcy. They should not have to crowdfund to survive. Dad almost died because he couldn't afford to be sick. Your father almost died because he was too proud to ask for help, Sarah corrected quietly. The system is broken. Yes, but Bob made a choice. He chose silence. He chose to shut us out, and that choice almost killed him. She looked at her children. When he wakes up, we're going to have to teach him something he should have learned a long time ago, that he doesn't have to carry everything alone, that asking for help isn't weakness, that his life is worth more than any amount of money. If he wakes up, Lisa said. When? Sarah said firmly. Your father is too stubborn to die. even when he wanted to. On the morning of the 14th day, while Sarah dozed in the chair beside his bed, Bob Mitchell opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was the ceiling, white tills, fluorescent lights, the steady beep of monitors. His throat was raw. They'd removed at the breathing tube 2 days earlier, though he didn't remember it. He turned his head, every muscle protesting. Sarah was there, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, gray roots showing in her hair. She looked exhausted, old, beautiful. "Sarah," he tried to say, but only a rasp came out. Her eyes flew open. For a moment, she just stared at him. Then she lunged forward, grabbing his hand, pressing it to her face. "You're awake! Oh, God, you're really awake!" "Water," Bob managed. She held a cup with a straw to his lips. The water was the best thing he'd ever tasted. "How long?" "2 weeks. You've been in a coma for 2 weeks." The door opened, and Tommy appeared, stopping dead when he saw his father's open eyes. "Dad!" Within minutes, Lisa was there too, crying and laughing at the same time. Even little Emily was allowed in briefly, though she looked frightened of all the machines. Bob tried to piece together his memories. The workshop, falling, Jack calling for help, the ambulance, the hospital, Tommy in a white coat, then nothing. What happened? His voice was getting stronger. Tommy pulled up a chair. "You had a massive abscess, Dad, 15 centimeters along your psoas muscle, tracking your spine. It was full of MRSA, a drug-resistant infection. By the time we got you to surgery, you were in sepsis. Your heart stopped during the procedure." Bob absorbed this. "I died. For 90 seconds. Then we got you back." Eliab looked at his son's face, saw the dark circles, the weight loss, the haunted look in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Tommy, I'm so sorry." "Save it," Tommy said, but his voice broke. "Just promise me you'll never do something that stupid again." Bob's eyes moved to Sarah. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not relief, not anger. Something harder, more complicated. "Sarah!" "How much do you think this costs?" she asked quietly. The question hit him like a punch. "What? 2 weeks in ICU? Emergency surgery? 5 surgeons? All these medications. How much do you think it cost?" Bob felt ice in his stomach. "I don't. $287,000. And the insurance is refusing to pay because you knew you were sick and didn't disclose it." The room went silent, except for the beeping monitors. "So all your calculations were pointless," Sarah continued, her voice still eerily calm. "All your planning, your decision to suffer alone, your consideration of dying to give us life insurance money, all of it was for nothing. Because here we are anyway, with a bill that will wipe out our savings and then some." "How did you—" Bob's throat closed up. "You found the journal." "Yes, we all read it, every word." Bob looked at his children. Tommy's face was hard with suppressed anger. Lisa was crying again. "I thought," Bob's voice cracked, "I thought I was protecting you by planning to die." Sarah's composure finally broke. "By thinking we'd be better off with money than with you, Bob Mitchell. You are the most brilliant carpenter and the most idiotic human being I have ever known. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. I don't want apologies. I want to understand why. Why didn't you trust us? Why didn't you think we could handle this together?" Bob closed his eyes, 30 years of marriage, and he still couldn't find the right words. My dad, he finally said, he got sick. Cancer. We spent everything, our college funds, the house, everything, and he still died. I watched my mother lose her husband and her home in the same year. I swore I'd never do that to my family. So you decided to just die instead? Tommy's voice was sharp. Dad, that's insane. I know it is now. But when you're lying awake at 3 in the morning in pain, doing the math in your head, it starts to make a terrible kind of sense. Sarah sat back down, suddenly deflated. We're going to lose the house, Bob, even with the insurance fighting us. Even if we win the appeal, we'll probably lose everything. Was that worth dying for? No, Bob said immediately. God, no. I was wrong about all of it. I didn't know how to stop being the man who provides, who fixes things. If I couldn't do that anymore, what was I? You were our husband, our father, Lisa said through her tears. That's all we ever needed you to be. A knock on the door interrupted them. Jack Harrison stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable in the hospital setting. Sorry to intrude. I just wanted to check on you, Bob. Jack. Bob's voice was thick. Thank you for calling the ambulance, for saving my life. Yeah, well, you scared the hell out of me. Jack stepped inside, fidgeting with his cap. Look, I did something. I hope you're not mad. What did you do? Jack pulled out his phone and showed them a Facebook page. Help Save Bob Mitchell was the title. Below it was a photo of Bob in his workshop and a long post describing what had happened. Jack, you didn't, Sarah started. I did, and so did a lot of other people. Jack scrolled down to show the comments. Hundreds of them. We set up a GoFundMe, posted it all over the Winchester community groups. Local news picked it up. He clicked through to the fundraising page. Amount raised $247,830. Number of donors 1. 8 from 47. Bob stared at the screen, unable to process what he was seeing. That can't be real. It's real, Jack said. People remember you. Bob, remember all the free repairs you did, the church renovation you donated your time for, the deck you built for the Hendersons at cost when they were struggling. This town knows who you are. Sarah was scrolling through the comments, reading them aloud through her tears. Get well soon, Bob. You built my house. This man helped my family more times than I can count. Time to return the favor. I don't know Bob personally, but this story broke my heart. Healthcare in this country is broken. Nobody should have to choose between life and bankruptcy. My dad was like you, too proud to ask for help. He died because of it. Please don't let this happen again. The comments went on and on. Neighbors, former clients, people Bob had helped decades ago, complete strangers who just heard the story and wanted to contribute. Bob was crying now, shoulders shaking with sobs he'd held in for months. I thought I was alone. I thought it all depended on me. Sarah climbed onto the hospital bed beside him, careful of all the tubes and wires, and held him while he wept. You stubborn, wonderful fool, she whispered. You were never alone. You just had to let us in. As Tommy and Lisa joined them, all of them crying, all of them holding on to each other and to Bob, the man who'd nearly destroyed himself trying to protect them. Outside the room, Rebecca Stone stood watching through the window. She'd operated on hundreds of patients, saved countless lives. But something about Bob Mitchell's case had gotten under her skin. Maybe it was because he reminded her of her late husband, who'd also been too proud to seek help until it was too late. Maybe it was because she saw in Bob the toxic masculinity that killed so many men, the belief that asking for help was weakness, that suffering in silence was strength. Or maybe it was simply because she'd fought so hard to save him, had stood over his body doing chest compressions while his heart refused to beat. And she'd be damned if she'd let him waste this second chance. She made a decision. Stone walked to the hospital administrator's office and knocked on the door. "Jennifer, I need to talk to you about the Mitchell case." 6 months later, Bob stood at the entrance to his workshop, leaning heavily on a cane. His back still ached on cold mornings, and he couldn't bend the way he used to. But he was alive. That was more than he'd expected to be. The workshop looked different now. The heavy machinery had been sold. In its place were workbenches at standing height, shelves of hand tools, and chairs for students. A sign hung above the door, "Mitchell's Woodworking School, teaching the next generation." Sarah came up behind him and slipped her arm through his. "Ready as I'll ever be." Today was the grand opening. 12 students had signed up for the first-class veterans transitioning to civilian life, teenagers from the youth center, and 2 recovering addicts from the halfway house downtown. Bob had decided that if he couldn't do heavy carpentry anymore, he could at least pass on what he knew. The first student arrived early. Marcus, a veteran in his 30s, with a prosthetic leg and haunted eyes. He'd lost his leg in combat and his purpose when he came home. "Mr. Mitchell," Marcus said, shaking Bob's hand, "thank you for this opportunity." "Call me Bob, and I should be thanking you for your service and for giving an old man a reason to get out of bed." More students filtered in. Bob showed them around, explained the tools, talked about safety. But before they started the actual work, he pulled up a stool. "Before we begin, I need to tell you something about myself." He told them about the lump, about ignoring it, about the fear and the pride and the terrible math that had led him to consider death over asking for help. He told them about coding on the operating table, about the $287,000 bill, about the community that had saved him when he couldn't save himself. "I'm telling you this because woodworking is about precision and patience, but it's also about knowing your limits, knowing when a job is too big to handle alone, knowing when to ask for help. I almost died because I forgot that." The students listened in silence. Then Marcus spoke up. "I know what you mean. When I came back from overseas, I thought asking for help made me weak, thought I had to figure everything out myself. I was wrong, too." Others nodded. Everyone in that workshop, Bob realized, was there because they were rebuilding themselves in one way or another. "All right then," Bob said, standing with effort. "Let's make something." The weeks turned into months. Bob's students dived. Marcus discovered he had a gift for detail work. A teenager named Destiny, who'd been in and out of trouble, found focus she'd never had before. They weren't just learning to build furniture. They were learning to build lives. Bob's own life had changed in ways both large and small. The GoFundMe money had covered most of the hospital bill. The insurance company after a lengthy appeal process and threats from Tommy to go to the media, had finally agreed to cover a portion of the costs. The hospital, after Dr. Stone's advocacy and the threat of 30 nurses signing a petition, had written off the remaining balance. The Mitchells still had debt, about $23,000 to be paid over 5 years, but they had their house. Their savings were depleted, but not destroyed. They would be okay. Sarah had gone back to teaching part-time at the elementary school. She'd also started writing a blog about caregiving, about the impossible choices families faced, about loving someone who refused to be loved. It had gained a small but devoted following. Tommy had specialized in infectious disease and now volunteered at a free clinic every Saturday. He'd also written a research paper on delayed care-seeking behavior in working-class men, using his father's case as the catalyst. The paper had been published in a medical journal. Change was slow, but it was happening. Lisa had found work at a healthcare advocacy nonprofit, helping families navigate the impossible maze of insurance and bills. She'd moved into her own apartment, and while money was tight, she was proud of her independence. One Saturday afternoon, Bob was in the workshop helping Destiny sand a jewelry box when Sarah called him inside. Tommy and Lisa were there with the grandkids. "What's this about?" Bob asked. Tommy handed him an envelope. "Open it." Inside was an invitation. Massachusetts General Hospital was hosting a men's health awareness night, and Bob had been asked to speak. Me speak. "They want to hear your story, Dad. Dr. Stone suggested you. She thinks it could help other men who are going through what you went through." Bob looked at the invitation, his hands trembling slightly. Public speaking terrified him. He was a carpenter, not an orator. But then he thought about Marcus and Destiny and all his other students. Thought about the men who might be sitting at home right now, ignoring symptoms, doing terrible math, convincing themselves their families would be better off without them. "Okay," he said. "I'll do it. The night of the event." Bob stood backstage at the hospital auditorium, sweat soaking through his dress shirt. 200 people were out there, mostly men over 50, many with their wives or children. Tommy stood beside him. "You've got this, Dad." "What if I freeze? What if I can't?" "Then you'll be human. Just tell your truth. That's all anyone can ask." Bob walked onto the stage. The lights were bright. He couldn't see the audience, which somehow made it easier. "My name is Robert Mitchell," he began, his voice shaking. "8 months ago, I almost killed myself with the pride." He told them everything, the full, ugly truth. The lump he'd ignored, the pain he'd hidden, the journal entries where he'd considered death preferable to burdening his family, the moment on the operating table when his heart had stopped. "I thought being a man meant suffering in silence," Bob said. "I thought providing for my family meant protecting them from my weakness. I thought if I couldn't be strong, I was worthless." He paused, gripping the podium. "I was wrong about everything." He told him about Sarah, who'd loved him through his stupidity, about Tommy, who'd fought to save a father who wouldn't save himself, about Lisa, who'd reminded him that his presence mattered more than his productivity, about a community that had rallied around him when he'd thought he was alone. "The greatest lie I ever told myself was that I had to carry everything alone. The truth is, The strongest thing I ever did was let people help me. When he finished, the auditorium was silent for a long moment. Then someone started clapping, then another person, then everyone was on their feet. After the event, 47 men signed up for health screenings. 3 of them would later discover serious conditions in time to treat them. One man, a 62-year-old mechanic, would have his life saved because Bob's story convinced him to get a chest X-ray that revealed early-stage lung cancer. Bob would never know all the lives his honesty touched that night. But he knew he'd done something that mattered. On the drive home, Sarah reached over and took his hand. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I should have been honest months ago, years ago. I wasted so much time being stubborn." "Yes, you did. But you're not wasting time anymore." That night, Bob couldn't sleep. He got up and went to the workshop, turning on just the small lamp over his bench. He pulled out a piece of walnut wood he'd been saving. For the next 3 hours, he worked on a new ring for Sarah. His hands weren't as steady as they used to be, and his back forced him to take frequent breaks. But he persisted. This ring would be perfect. Smooth. Unbroken. When Sarah came looking for him at dawn, she found him polishing the finished piece. "What's this?" "A new ring. The old one has carried us through 30 years. But I thought maybe—" He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. Sarah held out her hand. The old ring was still there, nicked and cracked, but she'd never taken it off. Bob slipped the new ring on beside it. "Both," Sarah said. "I'll wear both. The old one reminds me of where we've been. The new one reminds me of where we're going." She kissed him, and it felt like the first time and the 1,000th time all at once. "I love you, you stubborn fool. I love you too. And Sarah, thank you for not giving up on me. Never," she promised. "Never again." Outside, the sun was rising over Winchester, painting the sky gold and pink. In the workshop, among the sawdust and tools and half-finished projects, Bob and Sarah held each other and watched the light creep in. There was still debt to pay, still doctor's appointments and physical therapy and hard conversations about mortality and money. The future was uncertain and imperfect, but they would face it together, and that, Bob finally understood, was enough. If you saw yourself in Bob's story, you're not alone. So many of us were raised to believe that strength means assurance, that asking for help is weakness, that protecting our families means carrying every burden ourselves. But Bob almost died believing that lie. His wife almost lost him. His children almost grew up without their father, not because the medical system failed him, though it did, not because he lacked resources, though that was part of it. He nearly died because he couldn't say 3 simple words, "I need help." The truth Bob learned too late, then just in time, is this: your family doesn't need your perfection. They need your presence. They don't need you to be invincible. They need you to be honest. The greatest gift you can give the people who love you isn't protection from hardship. It's the chance to love you through it. If there's a conversation you've been avoiding, a doctor's appointment you've been postponing, a truth you've been hiding because you think it makes you weak, please hear this: asking for help is the bravest thing you'll ever do. You're worth saving. Your story isn't over yet. What's one thing you've been putting off that you know you need to address? Have you ever felt like Bob, caught between pride and the need for help? Share your thoughts below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.